everyone. My name is Chrissy Smith, and this is Nine Lives Energy, and together we energize your body from the inside out. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have Dr. Joy Jeffers, who is the department chair over the PTA program at Guilford Tech, and a lot of students that come into the program are interested in becoming a physical therapist, but then maybe they decide that they want to do PTA. And Dr. Jeffers has a lot of information to share. He's been in the industry for quite a while, has a wealth of knowledge in order to share. So we're going to welcome him to the stage. Thank you so much for being here, Joey.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in the field of PT. I know that a lot of people that decide to go into this field end up having a sports injury of some kind, and then they end up getting treatment from a physical therapist and decide to go that route because of the healing that they have experienced from participating in certain modalities that have helped them get back onto the field, or to maybe change direction and still are able to be involved in sports, but they do it just a different way. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in the field. Maybe it was a mentor that you met with, and or maybe it was a sports injury that you had. We would love to hear your story.
Okay, well, that is true. A lot of our students got into physical therapy because they had an injury in whatever sports they were participating in. So that's a common way people are initially exposed to physical therapy. That wasn't the case with me. I was very active and involved in sports, but never had a significant injury where I needed to receive physical therapy. So I went to school in Texas at Baylor University and just knew that I wanted to be in a health profession. So like many other students, I was pre-med at Baylor. And during that time, I learned about a student club that was present. And it was a club for students who were interested in physical therapy. So didn't know much about it, but it sounded interesting to me. So I became involved in the physical therapy club at Baylor. And we did different things. We went on field trips to PT programs at different schools. And as I found out more about physical therapy, it sounded more like the interest that I had in something that I wanted to pursue. So I volunteered in a physical therapy clinic at that time, observed physical therapy. And as someone who was interested in promoting an active lifestyle, I just became very interested and decided to pursue physical therapy at that time.
Awesome. So, what year was this? Because I know that the field has changed, and probably some of the modalities maybe that you used back then we don't use anymore. Tell us a little bit about your experience with that.
Well, that was in the 1980s. And so I went to Baylor for 3 years. And at that time, the entry level degree for a physical therapist was the bachelor's degree. So I went to Baylor for 3 years and then was accepted into a physical therapy program at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. And it was a 2-year program. So I got a bachelor's degree in physical therapy. Shortly after that, the degree moved to a master's degree. And then not long after that, the entry level degree moved to a doctor of physical therapy degree, or a DPT. So now to be a physical therapist, you have to get a bachelor's degree and then apply to a graduate physical therapy program or a doctor of physical therapy program. So the education has increased quite a bit since the 1980s. And there's been a change in the focus of practice too over those many years. So many years ago, we used to use a lot of passive modalities in physical therapy, hot packs, cold packs, ultrasound, traction, electrical stimulation. And we still use those things, but not nearly to the degree that we used to. the approach over the last few decades has really moved to a more active approach. And our main focus is really to try to get people moving as much as possible given their particular situation. So we try to avoid emphasizing passive modalities and really emphasize a more active approach. And one example of that would be in terms of the way we treat back pain. So many years ago, when people had neck pain or back pain, it was common to do a massage, do a hot pack or a cold pack, ultrasound, electrical stimulation, and maybe a little bit with exercise. And what was found over time was that was actually detrimental because it encouraged a passive mindset on the part of people with neck and back pain. And what's really been found is that what's really necessary is for people in that situation to be as active as possible. And long term, that's a more helpful approach to managing their neck and back pain. So that has been a significant development over the last many years.
I'm sure that there's a lot of neck issues now with the text neck, people looking down like that. And I don't know if physical therapy clinics have seen a rise in this particular issue with patients and how they're treating those. Are you seeing this in the different settings that you work with? I know you work at Guilford Tech, but I didn't know if you kind of worked in different other areas or if maybe this was kind of like a hot topic within your field that maybe you'd like to discuss a little bit.
Well, personally, I retired from seeing patients about 5 years ago, but we're very much in contact with active clinicians. And yeah, text neck is actually a condition that I talked to our students about just 2 weeks ago, and played videos from the mainstream media that's actually talking about this. So another way that physical therapy addresses that or manages that is through education. So we'll do a lot in terms of postural education, ergonomics, body mechanics, and again, incorporating all of that into an active lifestyle. Technology has definitely resulted in certain kind of new conditions that are addressed in physical therapy.
Yeah, I can't imagine some of these clinics right now having the text neck, and then you have athletes in there, especially if you have a helmet on. You're putting even more weight on something like that with somebody's posture not working so well. So, when you mentioned about having to, it was a bachelor's degree when you graduated, and then it shortly thereafter moved to a master's program and then to a doctoral program. Do you want to explain a little bit about your experience at that time, as far as like maybe any lapses in education, maybe any other things that happened in your life that could have caused you to have maybe some outside challenges because maybe you were working in the field or maybe you had a family, so having these other outside personal obligations that took some of your energy and time, and how you kind of handled going back to school, if you did have any lapses in education during that time.
Yeah, so for a period of time, there was something called a transitional DPT degree. So these were degrees for people like me who had an entry-level bachelor's or master's degree in physical therapy. And it was a way for us to get caught up to the current doctor of physical therapy degree. So I did this in 2005 through 2007. I got a transitional DPT from UNC Chapel Hill. And yes, I had 4 kids at the time, and was working full time. So most of it was an online program through UNC. I was seeing patients at the time too. So it was kind of, the assignments were worked out with the actual patients that I was working with. That was a pretty challenging time, but I thought that since I was in physical therapy education, I really wanted to have the degree that our profession as a whole had said was the appropriate degree for practicing physical therapists.
How long have you been at Guilford Tech? And were you the one who established the PTA program, or how have you seen it evolve, I guess, since you've been here?
So there was another physical therapist who started the program here. Her name was Sherry Cantrell. So she started it in the 1990s. And I had for a long time been looking to move into education in some way. And so she started the program, but then I was her first hire. So we started off as two full-time faculty with the program. So we started in 1998. That's when we took our first class of students. Um, so over time, we still have two full-time faculty here, but we also have uh, four regular part-time faculty who are really excellent clinicians. So they work full-time in physical therapy, and then they're part-time instructors with our program. And over the years, we've really increased the number of clinical instructors we have. So our students do full-time clinical rotations for 17 weeks while they're in the program, where they're in various healthcare facilities, mostly around the Piedmont Triad region. And so we have clinical instructors who are full-time clinicians who work with our students. So over the years, we've increased the number of facilities where we do rotations and the number of people who are serving as clinical instructors.
Now, I know that there's different, I guess, environments that a physical therapist could work in. Can you talk about those for just a little bit to our students, and then maybe talk about how the PTA would help the physical therapist? I don't know if all those different environments allow for a PTA to be there, or if it's just a physical therapist. But I just wanted to give some information out for the different job settings, because they're not just all clinical or hospital based.
Right. And let me talk about the similarities and differences between PTs and PTAs. So a physical therapist assistant, or a PTA, is much closer to a physical therapist than a physical therapy aide. So a physical therapy aide is a non-licensed person who works in a physical therapy clinic. Both a PT and a PTA are licensed practitioners. So as I've said, the PT has a Doctor of Physical Therapy degree. A PTA, or physical therapist assistant, has an associate's degree. And that's the program we have here at Guilford Tech. It's a physical therapist assistant program, a 2-year associate's degree program. The focus of the physical therapist assistant is direct patient care. That's what they do from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. They don't have quite as many documentation or administrative responsibilities as a physical therapist does. So the physical therapist is the one who is ultimately responsible for patients. And a PTA works under the direction and supervision of a physical therapist. But the PTA is much closer to the PT in terms of what they do, in terms of patient care. So they all work, both the PT and the PTA work in all the same type of settings. So they work in acute care or in hospitals. They work in outpatient settings, skilled nursing settings. They work in inpatient rehab, school settings with pediatric patients. So both PTs and PTAs all work in the same settings. The PT has to see a patient first and set up a plan of care, and often it's a PTA who will carry out that plan of care. But they're all working in the same settings.
So, what are some pros and I guess cons of both? I'm sure if you want to talk about the education requirements, obviously, one's going to be have a little bit higher price tag, but maybe let's talk about the return on investment, about how much I guess that you'd be spending on your education first, and the return on investment for that. And then also maybe some other pros or cons to the job that you feel for PT and possibly PTA. I know you maybe not have been a PTA, which is the assistant, but maybe things that you have seen in your experience as probably a pro or a con for that particular job that helps the PT.
Right. So we actually get students in our program who could go to a DPT program, but they're just interested in working in direct patient care. They don't want those extra documentation and administrative responsibilities. And they don't want to accumulate the debt that would be the case if they went through a DPT program. So that's one of the drawbacks of a PT program. It is very expensive, and a lot of students have to go into debt in order to do that. PTs will be making a higher salary than the PTAs, but for a lot of students, they finish school with quite a bit of debt. For the PTAs, it's a pretty good cost-benefit analysis. At the present time, it costs about $7,500 total to go through a PTA program. And then they're going to be making close to about $60,000 a year when they graduate. So it's a good cost-benefit analysis, and that plays into some of the decision-making that PTAs have. In terms of their different responsibilities, one of the drawbacks maybe of being a PTA is when people see that title, physical therapist assistant, they don't realize the pretty vigorous training that students have gone through to be PTAs. And in the minds of a lot of people, they think that the PTA is an aid, a physical therapy aid, and that's really not the case. So often PTAs have to be the main educators to others, including other healthcare providers, about exactly what a PTA does. In terms of general pros of physical therapy, I think most of the time patients are pretty grateful to be in physical therapy. They're very thankful that somebody is helping them recover and to move and to function well, even when that's a painful process, which sometimes it is. But I think a lot of patients tend to be grateful for their physical therapist and their PTAs. There's a lot of flexibility in the job. So a lot of PTs and PTAs can work part-time if that's what they want to do. And there's a lot of opportunities for that type of thing. And both PTs and PTAs can make a decent living. So they may not make as much as some healthcare providers. They make more than others, but it's a decent salary that people can certainly live on. In terms of some of the drawbacks, one of the things that's a drawback, really both with PTs and PTAs, mostly PTs, is the amount of documentation you have to do. If you ask most healthcare providers what's the one thing they really don't get too excited about, it's the amount of documentation that they have to do. Another drawback in physical therapy can be that often PTs and PTAs feel overwhelmed because where they're working is short-staffed. So there's a great need for both PTs and PTAs, and often facilities are short-staffed, so who they have are working pretty hard. And then another drawback can be the way reimbursement works. So there have been several times in my 30 plus years in PT where a change in reimbursement has scared people into thinking that either physical therapy is coming to an end or the PTA position is coming to an end. And let me give a recent example of that. Recently, Medicare determined that when PTAs are working with Medicare Part B patients, a facility is going to get reimbursed at 80% of what they would be reimbursed if a PT had seen the patient. So when that kicked in, people thought this is going to be the end of the PTA position. But as Usually happens, facilities found a way to work with that and everything got worked out, and there's still plenty of PTA positions for the foreseeable future. So there is a cycle of where that happens often in healthcare, where people think the world is ending and we just get it figured out and things continue on.
Tell us a little bit about the program that you have and some of the prerequisites that a student would need in order to get into the program, and maybe some things that would help the student more. Like, is it a point system? Is it volunteer hours? Is it experience? I know that in our past discussions when we've had this little chat, you said that a lot of the students who come into your program already have a bachelor's degree. And so with that, they're just looking for a different change of pace, a different opportunity to work doing something that they enjoy, because they already have a bachelor's degree, so they wouldn't have to take as many things. But I didn't know if there's certain classes that they would need to take that maybe expired after 5 years because they, graduated with their bachelor's degree 15 years ago. So explain a little bit about, the prerequisites that you have for your PTA program.
So it's a 2-year Associates of Applied Science degree, and the first semester is really the general education prerequisite courses. So that's like English, psychology, humanities, physics, and the two big ones are anatomy and physiology 1 and 2. And both PT and PTA programs are very competitive. So to get in, students really need to have A's or B's on those general education prerequisite courses. And we are a point system, so students get a certain number of points for the grades that they make on those classes. We also require a test called the TEAS, the Test of Essential Academic Skills, and students get points for the score that they make on that test. And we basically take the 24 students with the highest number of points. Generally, lately, we have about 50 students who finish the application process. So we take the 24 top students of those 50. We do not require observation hours. We would like to, but our clinical facilities have said they would prefer our students not to do that. There's a long discussion about that, but we don't require that. I think that's a good idea. So applicants have an idea of what's involved in physical therapy, but we don't require it. And it is true about half of us, our students or applicants, already have a bachelor's degree. Very commonly, it's a bachelor's in exercise and sports science, which is a very good degree. It gives you a lot of options, but it doesn't give you a specific job typically. It's very good for going into different health professions, including the PTA program or a PT program, or nursing or medical school even. It's very good for all the health professions. But typically we'll have about 50% of our students with a bachelor's degree. Sometimes they have master's degree. We've had 2 students with their PhDs. We've had a lot of students who are fairly fresh out of high school. We've had students who have done another job for several years and they want to change what they're doing and they've come back as a second career. So that's the general mix that we have in our program typically.
Is your program part-time based, or is it full-time based, or do you have 2 different options for students?
Unfortunately, we're not very flexible. We're full-time for 18 months for the 24 students who get accepted into the program. And that includes 17 weeks of clinical education courses, which means the students are not here at Guilford Tech. They're at High Point Regional Hospital or Murphy Wainer Outpatient Clinic or another healthcare facility. And they're there 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for several weeks at a time. So it is like being on a full-time job. That's pretty challenging for some students, but that's what's required to go through our program.
Have you found that students struggle with that because maybe they aren't used to the pace, or after a while they kind of get used to it? Because I'm sure that some are trying to work as well as manage family obligations, as well as go back to school, because at a community college, we're not servicing only students that come right out of high school. You know, some of these students have some experience under their belt, either, you know, taking some time off from high school to go into a community college, or possibly maybe having a bachelor's degree and then wanting to do something else.
Yeah, so one of the things we'll tell applicants is to really kind of assess where you are in your life. Like if students have children, they really want to assess that. We've had students who've had to drop out because it was too much stress on their family. We do have students with children, we do right now, who, you know, do well in the program, but we just want to make sure students have really thought about that, because it is a full-time program for those 18 months. We have a lot of students who do a part-time job, but we have had students who've either had to quit their job or cut back on their hours in order to handle the workload of the program, because it is a pretty intense program. I used to say it's impossible to work full-time and go through our program, but we've had 2 students do it. I'm not sure how they did it. They worked at night, they were single. I guess they didn't sleep, but they made it. Generally, for most of us, that wouldn't be realistic to do that. But it is a very intense full-time program for those 18 months.
Well, you know, you got your doctorate degree while managing 4 children and working, so it can be done.
I guess.
It can be done. The last question I'm going to ask you is, what advice would you give to any upcoming student, and maybe some advice that you wish somebody had given you? I know that in our past conversations, you feel like being an advocate for health and helping people feel better. And you mentioned that, you know, when we got on here today for our little chat, that, you know, that is something that you're an advocate for, is just to help people feel better. And if you want to help people feel better, you got to understand how to feel good yourself, and be an advocate for health. But I didn't know if there was any other advice that you would like to give to any students that are looking to become either a physical therapist or an assistant.
So that's a good point. You know, a main job that we have is to advocate for a healthy and active lifestyle. So it's probably good to just consider if that's true about oneself. You know, none of us is perfect, but in general, are we a part of a healthy, active lifestyle? Because we're constantly emphasizing that with patients. Other things I would consider, this could be a hard job for introverts. So I am an introvert, and I found it quite a struggle to be with patients from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And so I have found that our students who are really introverted can have it can be quite a challenge to be in this profession. So that's something that I would think about. And one piece of advice I would give people interested in physical therapy is to maybe ask people who know you pretty well, your family, your friends, if they think this is something that they could see you being good at. If it seems like you're kind of wired for this type of work. And kind of related to that, it's probably a good idea, if you're not familiar with what actually happens in physical therapy, to try to observe or volunteer or even work as a physical therapy aide in a physical therapy setting, so you have a more realistic. There is kind of a romanticized version of physical therapy, and then there's what actually happens. And it's probably helpful to have some awareness of what it's actually like before you pursue this.
Well, this is why I developed this class, is because I want students to know the ins and outs, the pros and the cons of all these jobs, you know, because I would hate to know that I had spent a lot of money and a lot of time romanticizing about what I thought a certain job was going to be and have stars in my eyes about that. And I get in there and I'm like, I don't like this. And then after a while, you're either forced to do it because, you know, you've spent all that time and money, or you're spending even more time and money to find something else that you enjoy. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I think you asked a lot of good questions. So I don't think so.
All right, folks. Well, Joey works here at Guilford Tech, and I will leave his contact information in the description box below if you would like to reach out to him. He's also here at Guilford Tech. Please make sure that if you have any questions, you email him and ask any questions that you may have. My name is Chrissy Smith. This is Nine Lives Energy, and together we energize your body from the inside out. Thanks so much.